Let's get started. Welcome to tonight's show. My name is Alexa. I'm the head of online community here at Housecall Pro, and I'm your host for the Home Service Evening Update. I'm joined by my co-host, Roland. He's co-founder of Housecall Pro, and Mel, our senior vice president of people. Tonight, we also have Brooks, our COO, who makes guest appearances at least once a week, especially when we have awesome guests like George. So each evening at 5 p.m. Pacific time, Monday through Thursday, we share the state of the world according to the home service industry, and we focus on one main topic or guest. We are so excited to welcome Captain George Daum. He has served as commanding officer and flight leader of the U.S. Navy's prestigious Blue Angels flight demonstration squadron. I would love to know in the chat who here has ever seen a Blue Angels flight demonstration. Even in the Facebook group today, we saw pros posting like, I remember the first time I saw my first Blue Angels flight demonstration. So we'd love to know when your first flight demonstration was. So George is actually a global thought leader on building strong leaders and teams through earning and developing trust. And he's here to teach you how to achieve more trust with your customers, with your employees, and everyone else around you through his 5 C's of leadership. So if you're wondering where to watch past episodes of this, go to our YouTube channel. Just type in Housecall Pro, and the first playlist that pops up at the top is the Coronavirus Evening Update. You can watch all of them there, and make sure you're in our Facebook group. So we will get back into it with George right after our evening State of the World News Update with Mel.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm Melina Fairley, Senior Vice President of People at Housecall Pro. Please feel free to call me Mel. We do come to you live Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific to give you a daily recap on the news related to coronavirus and to bring you really inspirational guests and tactical information, advice, and a sense of community. So I am not a reporter. I just play one here every night, but I am a human resources professional. I'm also a homeowner, a mom of 4, and relevant to tonight, I'm a proud Marine Corps wife. My husband, David, is a retired lieutenant colonel and F-18 Hornet pilot. So he was not in the Blue Angels, but he was in the Red Devils. So I don't know, maybe that matters for something here. We're also under the flight path at Miramar, so occasionally at night you actually hear Hornets in the background when I'm talking with you. So let's get into your evening update for Wednesday, May 13th, 2020. The Johns Hopkins dashboard is reporting over 4.3 million confirmed cases globally, and we're nearing 300,000 deaths on the global stage, with 1.5 million recovered. Here in the US, we are at 1.38 million. There's our dashboard. Yeah, 1.3 million confirmed cases, which is just a staggering number. And we have just surpassed 84,000 deaths, and have, last I checked, over 240,000 recovered. There we go. So we'll keep updating this for you every night. Trend-wise, the majority of countries are currently exhibiting doubling times of more than 10 days compared with the end of March, when most countries were doubling faster than 8 days. So this is an encouraging sign. A number of countries in Africa, however, are doubling faster. So we will again keep an eye on those trends. Here at home, the New York Times continues to track state-level occurrences with a focus on who's reopening. This is a cool map where you can see who's shut down and who's not. So you can see shut down is now the minority. It's us here in California and some other states. Partial reopening and reopening soon is definitely the trend. Thanks for the assist with the map, Roland.
Yep, you can click down on them and it'll scroll your way down here.
Yeah, you can
go state by state.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what we're seeing is that more than half of states have started to reopen their economies in some meaningful way. Many states that are reopening haven't met the criteria that was recommended by the Trump administration before loosening restrictions. So we'll be able to watch and see if that's had any impact to what's going on with those cases. So for example, in Georgia, back to giving haircuts with face masks and gloves. In Texas, movie theaters are open. People in Tennessee can go to the gym. Washington State, which was our early epicenter, has continued to relax social distancing. So they have a phased plan that they're calling Safe Start. And counties with less than 75,000 people who've not had a new case in the past 3 weeks can apply to move to what they're calling phase 2, which is retail stores can open as long as they stay below 30% occupancy. Restaurants can open if they stay below 50% occupancy. So this is just an example of the type of phases that we're starting to see here in the States. Face masks or facial coverings still seem to be, depending on where you are. Some are mandatory in some parts of the country, some are not. Some governments have mandated it. In some states where it's not mandatory, some businesses are permitted to set their own requirements, which can mean that things can get really confusing out there with variations from shop to shop and community to community. So here in San Diego, we've got to wear them if we're outside and going to be within 6 feet of people. Yesterday, the U.S. Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions held a much anticipated hearing with several senior officials from the government's COVID-19 response. So they addressed a broad scope of topics, including the potential for increased transmission as states do relax some stay-at-home measures. Also in Washington, the big news there is at least talk of a new House COVID-19 bill. So Democrats in the House introduced a new economic stimulus bill. So this one's being called the HEROES Act, and it would provide an estimated $3 trillion in funding to state, local, and tribal governments. So this is not necessarily expected to pass. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell indicated that the bill is not likely to pass the Senate, but what this bill is proposing is funding for stimulus checks, supplemental unemployment benefits, student loan forgiveness, some of the things we've heard about before, more help for small businesses and healthcare, and notably a supplemental pay for essential frontline workers, so $25,000 each through the end of 2020, which would be the first that we've seen something quite like that. So we will keep you posted on what is happening with that bill as it starts to pass through debate and through Congress, and we'll keep you updated here. So I'm super excited about tonight. My family's all going to gather around and watch. So really excited to hear all about what Captain George Dom has to say. Alexa?
Fantastic. Thank you, Mel, as always, for our news update. I get all my news from you because I trust you, as I'm sure all of our pros do. So we will see Mel back here tomorrow at 5 p.m., same time, for your next news update, what has happened over the last 24 hours. Thanks, Mel. All right, so we are going to get into the main portion of our show now with Captain George Dom. If you are just now joining us, I see we have a bunch more viewers now. Captain George Dom is here to talk with us about the 5 C's of high-level leadership. We had a meeting with him earlier today and my mind was just blown, and I cannot wait for you all to hear and learn what he has to say and teach. He also has some really cool Blue Angel short stories that he's going to be sharing with us along the way too. And at the very end, we are going to tell you how to get access to a free 90-day email course from George. So stick around till the end so you can get access to that. And any questions you have throughout this entire time, throw it in the Q&A. If you have anything you want to say to us, make sure you put it in the chat and it's addressed to everyone in meeting. So Brooks, kick us off.
George, great to see you again. It was nice to catch up earlier today. Really excited about this conversation tonight. But I want to make sure we set you up for success right out of the gate. So maybe Roland, you can give some background on who our audience is, both the customers of Housecall Pro, but also just the broader SMB audience so he knows who he's talking with. Is that fair, Roland?
Yeah, definitely. So George, thank you again for coming on here, spending time with us. We built this webcast as a public service for all of our SMBs, specifically our customers. So we talked a little bit earlier, but HVAC, electricians, plumbers, home cleaners, window washers, handyman, general contractors, everyone that provides a service at a home. Typically, they're between owner-operator status, or maybe a husband and wife team, or a father-son, or et cetera, all the way up to 20, 30 people of size. And ultimately, they're all CEOs of their own business. And so we do this as a way to get a lot of information that we're reading out there, synthesize it, keep it nice and short and punctual in the beginning, and then have guests like yourself on to give some of the experiences back. Obviously, a lot of our pros, when this pandemic hit, you don't feel necessarily what the right next step is, but oftentimes just taking a step is better than taking none at all. And so we do this as inspiration for them. Hopefully they can get some tips and tricks. And at the end of it, always like to share the one thing they should be working on tomorrow to get them back to thriving again. So that being said, I'll pass it to Brooks, and we're going to get into some questions with you.
Right on. All right, so George, I was thinking about this question from earlier today when we were chatting, and now look at what you've accomplished in your career, which is just otherworldly, right? You know, not only to make it into a program to become a fighter pilot, but to make it to the very top, the acme of that universe, right? To not only make it to Top Gun as an instructor, which is something that has been immortalized in film at this point and will be in the same again, I think, before too long. But then also to become the #1 seat of the commanding officer of the Blues, I think is how you referred to it, of the Blue Angels for the rest of us. I mean, that is the stuff of gods, right? And so what I'm trying to reconcile is I'm just a person who serves other people in my community and our employees. Tell us about yourself. Like, how do you go, like, who are you? Give us some of your background of who you are and how did you rise to those extraordinary, well, lofty levels? Is that fair?
Well, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, the youngest of 3 boys. My father had served in the Navy in World War II. And while he didn't pressure us in any way, I could tell that he had a desire for one of his sons to have a military experience. And being the youngest, it came down to me. And but it was, other than proposing to my wife, it was the smartest decision I made, was to apply for an ROTC scholarship and get commissioned into the Navy and go off to flight school. And then it was just sort of one step after the other. And I was just very, very fortunate.
Yeah. So if you think about our customer, the pro, they are, as Roland said, the CEO of their own company. They may be a one-person shop, but even then, they have a family they're answering to. They have their community, they have the country. Then you also typically have a significant other in the business with them and 3, 4, 5, 10 employees. And I think they, like us, are just trying to figure out, how do I build a team that can actually go from a world of just surviving in this upside down world to actually thriving again? You have any thoughts for them on how to, like, what's the thing to do next? Or how do you go build a team, and how do you get into the fight and actually do well and get to a point of thriving in the COVID-19 world?
Right. Well, it's there's no one quick answer. There's no silver bullet. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes dedication. Of course, probably the most important ingredient in building a team is hiring the right people. And so you need to make sure that you bring into the organization the people that share your values, that have the characteristics that you think are necessary in order to be successful. And in my experience, as I've thought about this a lot, and of course, flying with the Blue Angels or being in a strike fighter squadron in combat and so forth, pretty intense experiences. The neat thing about it, though, is that these extreme experiences, they sort of uncover universal truths, things that have to work, because you don't have the luxury of being able to compromise. You have to distill it down to the very essence. And so what I'd like to share with the audience, because as I understand, many of them have a military background, but even so, they are all very successful in their own right. So what I'm going to share with them is not something that's particularly new. Everything here they've heard before or picked up along the way, but every now and then, and this COVID situation allows us an opportunity to step back and to sort of reflect a little bit. And in my mind, it gives us an opportunity to get back to the basics, if you will, and then and reapply those. So, so my thoughts on that is that, when I joined the Blue Angels as the leader, interestingly enough, you don't come in as the wingman and then fleet up to be the leader. You come in as the leader. And as I joined the team, I never forgot for a day on the 2 years I was wearing a blue flight suit, that the tragic accident that befell the Air Force demonstration team, the Thunderbirds, when they were doing a formation loop in training. And if you look at the picture behind Roland there, you can see that when we're flying that close together, I mean, literally 2 feet apart. I mean, if my wingman could roll down the window in their cockpit, they could literally reach up and touch my jet or the jet that's in front of them. And we're moving at 300, 400, 500 miles an hour at very low altitude in amongst the buildings and the trees and the bridges. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to do 3-dimensional aerobatics. That's a day at the office, right? And this day, excuse me, the Thunderbirds were doing a formation loop in training. And unfortunately, on this day, the leader didn't pull out of the loop. And they put 4 T-38 fighters symmetrically spaced into the desert floor, killing all 4 pilots. Man. So for me to be successful as the flight leader of the Blues, I had to figure out, you know, what do I have to do to develop a level of trust with my wingmen that they would come to work every day and literally put their life in my hands every single day. Frankly, I wasn't smart enough to figure it all out ahead of time, but we had 2 amazing years. And when I look back on that experience, I realized there were 5 things that I had to pay attention to in order to earn that level of trust. And you have to do all 5. If you drop one out, you're going to have a little bit of a setback. But the good news is, if you pay attention to one, it reinforces the other 4, and it gives you a really powerful team. And so if I pull them apart to chat about them very briefly, and for each one of these, there was a question that my team was asking about me every day. And depending upon the answer they discerned, they would make a decision on, do they trust me to fly here, or are they going to fly somewhere else out there, right? And I believe these are the same 5 questions that your teams are asking about each of you in the audience. And don't misunderstand me. My message takeaway tonight is not that we should just blindly trust people more. In fact, I think it's important that there's people that we shouldn't trust. But, and frankly, I want my daughters thinking about these 5 things whenever the gentlemen ask them out on dates. But let me go through them very quickly.
Great.
The first one is character. And the question my team was asking about me was very simple. Do you walk your talk? Do you keep your promises? Do you live up to your commitments and your obligations, right? Do you live our shared core values in the Navy and Marine Corps, which are honor, courage, and commitment? Now, I imagine for your audience, a core value for them is reliability, right? They want to show up on time, every time, and get the job done to a high level of excellence, right? Mm-hmm. Well, let me tell you about Blue Angel reliability. When a Blue Angel team comes to your hometown for an air show on a Thursday, and the C-130 Hercules transport airplane taxis up to the terminal and shuts down its engines and hoists the American flag, something really, really good is about to happen, because out of that airplane comes the heart and soul of the Blue Angels. I mean, when people think of the Blue Angels, they think of the 6 jet pilots. Oh no, the heart and soul of the team are these 45 or 50 support personnel, enlisted maintenance technicians that come out of this airplane, and they are on fire. And they immediately own their responsibility and get after whatever they have to do to make that weekend a success. Here's the neat part. Whenever they have their responsibility taken care of, they reflexively look up and around to see which one of their teammates is having a challenge that they can go help them with. I mean, I've seen chief petty officers on their hands and knees with spray bottles of Armor All, polishing jet tires or the shiny blue metal on the jets. And I've seen engine mechanics shepherding elementary school children on tours, whatever it takes, because we succeed or fail as a team. The second one is commitment. And my team was absolutely certain that I was going to show up to lead them with a smile on my face. And when the air was smooth and the sky was blue and the sun was shining, but they knew that during the season, we were going to have to take a punch. There was going to be some storms. And so their question for me was, are you going to be with us when the going gets tough? And not just are you going to be with us, but are you going to show up and play your A game and lead us to victory on the other side of the storm? Because if you're just going to show up and cast blame, take names, make excuses, CYA, forget about it. That's not what they want.
Was there a time along the way, George, that they saw that commitment in you? Because you said you came in, you're the number one seed, right? They're looking to you for direction to lead them and to really bring this team together. Was there a breakthrough moment along the way where they understood that you really had that commitment, that you were someone they wanted to follow and support?
Well, that was something, of course, I was building from the very beginning, but the story I often tell is about an air show that we did in El Paso, Texas, my first year. And the weather was it was pretty turbulent. The wind was blowing 24, 26 knots, coming over a ridge line over the airport and just causing a lot of turbulence. And we made some adjustments, and nobody on the ground had any idea how hard we were working that day. But when we landed, we were a different team, because that day they learned that on the toughest conditions, I was going to show up and fly a really solid jet. And I learned that on the toughest days, they were going to join up and fly close in formation with me. And so our performance went to a new level after that show, because we went to a new level of trust and confidence.
That's amazing. So every day you keep working incrementally to improve, tight routines, tight practices, and that was a kind of a breakthrough day for you. Was that early on in the team building for you?
Well, yeah, it was fairly early in that season. I mean, whenever you come out of winter training, we go to winter training from early January to the middle of March, and throughout that, the entire squadron, it's all about building trust. Because think about it, when you see the team fly, 3 of the pilots are in their first year and 3 are in their second year. It's a 2-year rotation. So 50% turnover in the formation every year. And for the support personnel, they're on a 3-year assignment. So for them, 33% turnover. So just imagine if you had that amount of turnover in your company. It's amazing. So a lot of the winter training is all about, just like any sports team that goes into, summer camp or whatever, you are building trust and confidence in each other.
Got it. Okay, so the character, commitment, what comes next?
So next is competence. And this is the one we typically think about when we're making a trust decision. Are we going to hire somebody? Are we going to promote them or whatever? Where did they go to school? What's their resume say, and so forth? And believe me, being competent, skilled is really important. No question about it. You've got to be good at what you do. But I put it third for a reason, because I believe that if you don't get the first 2, if the person doesn't walk his or her talk and isn't committed and all in, the competence doesn't really matter, right? But if you can get the first 2, if you hire somebody who shares your values as core values and won't compromise and is all in committed to your company's mission and purpose, then by and large, you can teach them what they need to know. They're just so fired up. But the question my team was asking about me every day in the pre-flight briefing, in fact, I'd look around the conference table and I could see it in their eyes. The question was, are you good enough to be our leader today? Are you better than you were yesterday, but not as good as you're going to be tomorrow? Because we don't want to stay here. We want to keep getting better and better and better. And we can't get better as a team unless you, as a leader, keep getting better and better. So, it was an atmosphere of continuous learning. We were always trying to improve and get better. We never were satisfied with a performance. And we spent a lot of time debriefing after every flight demonstration and every practice in order to be able to analyze what went well, what can we learn, what can we do better next time. And if when we get to Q&A, if people want to learn a little bit about that, the debrief sessions that we used to do are pretty unique, and I'll be happy to share a little bit about that, because I don't think I've seen many organizations that debrief quite like we did.
I love that. Like,
Yeah,
you know, we talk a lot
debriefs.
about incrementalism. We talk about, I'm going to be better tomorrow than I was today, and even better the day out. Actually, I love that part of it, that even better the day after that, so that I'm constantly working towards peak performance and investing in that outcome, right? And I think that's a great lesson for our pros, because what we find, particularly the audience that shows up here, that's out there supporting one another in our group, that out there leading these teams, is they do have that learner mindset, right? They're investing in their own knowledge, they're investing in their own skills, and they realize they don't have to be perfect. They just have to keep investing, getting better, and good things will happen for them. It sounds like you made that an absolute practice in your world. I guess you had to. It was ultimately kind of life or death than how you performed.
We did.
I think
And if you,
also, George, real quick, you talk a lot about just like living in constant, discomfort and always being uncomfortable as a process, a part of your learning of this, and deliberate practice. Maybe like elaborate a little bit on that piece, because I feel like sometimes it's easy for our pros to get comfortable and you kind of get in a groove, but then ultimately, you're not doing your team any favors, especially when you're talking about, their ability to trust in your competence. So maybe a little elaboration there, because we talk a lot about that.
yeah, that's a great point. So, the challenge that we have as leaders is, we get to a point of success, and then we develop this sort of ego or self-esteem and so forth, and we just try to protect it all the time. And consequently, as you say, we sometimes, we stop learning. And I love the story, if anybody's ever seen the TED Talk of Ken, I'll think of his name here in a minute, Ken Robinson. Anyway, he tells a story about a little elementary school where they're having art, and the teacher tells them they could just, draw a picture, whatever they want. And she's walking around the room, and she goes back to the back of the room, and here's little Mary back there working away on this picture. And she says, "Mary, what are you drawing?" And Mary looks up and says, "I'm drawing God." And the teacher says, "Mary, nobody knows what God looks like." And Mary says, "They will in a minute." And I think that's a great lesson for us, because kids aren't afraid to give it a go. They will get up and get after it, and they will just keep trying until they get there. And we need to be more like that as we get older. And frankly, in my mind, your teams will give you great credit if they know that you're trying to get better. Even if you stumble a little bit here and so forth, they will admire that, right? And you're leading by example, because you want them to get better too.
Yeah. Absolutely. So
ahead,
just an observation from the employee side of that. No one wants to be led by someone who won't get their hands dirty with them and who can't do the same job that they're doing. But for me, also in a leader, I look for someone who will accept my ideas and my feedback for their leadership and maybe what in some of their responsibilities too. So competence is key. It's very hard to respect someone who you don't think is a competent leader, especially with something like this going on in the sky. So this is absolutely relatable for employees as well.
Well, how many people do you know who are so comfortable doing their last job that they just keep doing their last job, right?
So many. That can't be a fulfilling.
This job.
Yeah, that can't be fulfilling. That looks like an exciting job, though. I keep looking at this picture. It's crazy.
Yeah, amazing. All right, so we've made it through 3 of the 5. What's the 4th one?
So the 4th one is I think the biggest one that leaders are missing today. And that's because we're all moving in a Mach 2 world. We are all skimming across the waves with these to-do lists a mile long, and we're trying to just get stuff done every day, moving at very high speed. And the 4th one is connection. And the question, you see, by the middle of the season, I could change the trajectory of a maneuver simply by the inflection of my voice on the radios. Not the words I said on the radios, but the way I said the words. If I needed to speed the roll to keep the formation underneath a cloud, I could do that. If I needed to pull harder at the bottom of a loop to miss a ridgeline or a bridge, I could do that. If I needed to tighten the turn to get the formation around a skyscraper, I could do that because my team, the guys on my wing, they believed I understood what I was asking them to do. But if for a minute they doubted that I knew what I was asking them to do back there, then you have hesitancy, you have hesitation, you have separation, you have disengagement, right? So the question I had to ask myself every day was, do they believe I understand them? Which is a different question than do I believe I understand them? Because what I believe is interesting, but not sufficient. What matters is, do they believe I understand them? And when they believe that you get them, that you understand their hopes and their concerns and their challenges and what they're facing every day out there on the job, then they will join up and follow you. But if they don't think you get them, then they're gonna check out. And you're not.
Hey, George, how do you get there on that? I love this theme of connection. Is it simply because you model the behavior, or is there some other path that you take so they have that belief that you understand them, that you really know who they are and what their needs, both met and unmet, are?
Yeah, so the fundamental thought is that you have to step away from your window and look at the world through their window. We always assume that everybody is looking at the world the same way we are, but they're not, because they're not you. They come with a whole different set of experiences and perspective and temperament and all of that. So we have to find ways, and typically the biggest skill to accomplish this, unfortunately, isn't taught in school, and that is just simply being able to be a really good listener, right? And Harvard Medical School did a study where they identified that the single biggest skill for a doctor to quickly and efficiently solve a patient's problem is the ability to get the patient to open up and just simply describe what's going on, what are my symptoms. So they followed 300 doctors around, and they would monitor them and time them. And what would happen typically is that the doctor would get the patient, okay, Mrs. Smith, what's going on? How are you doing? And Mrs. Smith would start to talk. And what they found was, on average, the doctors interrupted the patients in 18 seconds.
Wow.
18 seconds. Now, the lady pros they're gonna nod at this one, because this is what my wife is referring to when she opens up about something that is important to her and starts sharing it, right? And after a couple minutes, she'll stop and she'll say, "You're not listening, you're waiting." And she's right, because just like many of the guys out here in the audience, I solve problems. I'm a fix-it guy. That's what I do. So she gets 8 or 9 words out, and now I got the answer, and I'm just waiting for her to take a breath. So I can give her the answer, and then let's go, because we got stuff to get done here. And I've come to understand that the learning curve is a little shallow, but I'm getting better at that. But that's really the key. You have to find ways, and listening is the most powerful one, to make sure that you understand not what you think their story is, but what do they think their story is.
Yeah.
Not just listening to answer, as most people
right.
do. Listen, like you hear those 2 or 3 words and like, I know exactly what I'm going to say now. And that's something we have to train ourselves to do every day so we can be a better leader, a better teammate, and just a better human altogether.
Well, I think it would be interesting if the pros did a debrief after a call on a customer, a prospective customer or whatever, and afterwards did a debrief on how much did I talk and how much did they talk. Yeah. Because too often we are transmitting as professionals, right? And we don't give them a chance. We've got a solution, and we're gonna tell them how great it is. But I suggest a technique is to just keep asking. Well, what else can you tell me? What more is there? Is there anything else? Until you hear them say, "No, that's it," a couple times, then you're good. But until then, you should just keep listening.
There's incredible power if you go through the whole day. I task our salespeople with this one, George, which is go through the day, and every person that you run into, you have to ask them 3 questions and hear them out. And I mean the bus driver, the person on the the metro, the Uber driver, your employees, your significant other, and you will be exhausted at the end of the day if you do that.
Yep.
It's really hard to ask genuine questions and wait for the answer and probe and follow up until you really get the depth of it. I'm amazed I'm still married after 21 years, right? Like the first 7, I didn't manage to blow it. Because I, just like you, I had all the answers, right? I was just waiting for my wife to let me solve the problem. And I realized that had nothing to do with what she was trying to accomplish. Lucky me, I finally, sort of figured it out. And it sounds like you did the same thing, which is amazing.
Well, and as leaders, when we're with our teams, we feel obligated to be the pro from Dover, and we have to talk all the time. We have to have all the answers, and sometimes we just need to sit back and ask questions and listen.
Yeah. All right. So what's the? Oh, I'm sorry, Alexa. Go ahead.
I had another question because I think that's a really great actionable takeaway for our pros here. So most of the time when you're in a conversation, how do you become aware of how much you're actually speaking? How do our pros go back to their truck or maybe hang up the phone when they're done on a call and figure out how much talking they did, how much question asking they did?
Well, I think if they just go into the engagement with that as an objective and just be mindful of that, right? Just being aware of that as a criteria, I think they'll be able to figure out the answer. If you have somebody else with you on the call, they could be your truth teller, and they can tell you afterwards, here's how I saw it in terms of what the ratio was.
Yeah. I mean, there's real science in that, George, right? Again, I go back to sales reference on this one, but life is selling ultimately. Any kind of relationship, you're communicating ideas. And if in the first 5 minutes of engaging someone, they speak the majority of the time, they'll like you more for it. They'll say, Alexa, I really loved talking to Alexa. She was amazing. And really all she did was queue up a bunch of questions. I got to talk, and people love the sound and tenor of their own voice. And so they like you more for it. So it's just that idea of provoking questions and really being an active listener is incredibly powerful. Did you have that skill all of your life?
No, I'm still trying to, I picked it up along the way a bit, but I'm learning every day. The other thing is that, people have this notion, I'm an active listener. And what they mean by that is you tell me something and I'm going to tell you a story about how I did the same thing or I had a similar experience. And my advice on that is, look, if they want to hear about your experience, they'll ask.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we made it through 4. And you said the 4th one is the most important one. Is that right, George?
Yeah, the 4th one is connection. I think that's the most important one because I think Stephen Covey has it right, that you can be efficient with things, but you can't be efficient with people. And the only way to make connection with somebody else where they feel truly understood, you have to slow down and you have to take time and you have to invest into that relationship. And unfortunately, many of us are just traveling too fast, and we got these phones and all these things that distract us, that even when we are with somebody, and sometimes it's the people we say are most important to us, we're really not there. We're there, physically, but we're really not present.
Yeah, and one thing for our pros that might not realize who Stephen Covey is. So people know him best for the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but his best book, secretly, is The Speed of Trust, which goes really well with all the things that you're saying. So if you haven't read that, that is super valuable one. If you like what you're hearing here, you want to dive in even deeper.
Yeah. So the 5th one, Brooks, is communication. So if connection is about, do they believe I understand them? Communication is, do they understand me? And how many times have you been working for somebody or in a team with somebody and you just can't understand them? And in flying, in aviation, we had very specific protocols in order to avoid misunderstanding at 500 miles an hour. Who's going to talk when, what you're going to say, how you're going. But one of the key elements of it that we need to do on the ground is we have a way to acknowledge that the message was heard and understood. And too often for leaders, the biggest fallacy of communication is the presumption that it's occurred. Right? We say, I gave the speech, they get it. I had the talk, they get it. I sent the email, they get it. They don't get it. Not until you transmit consistently over a period of time with a variety of forums in order to ensure that they understand it, because they're not as close to it as you as the leader are, right? And so you need to have a mechanism that confirms that the message that you intended to send was actually the one that's received. And too often we forget to do that, and we assume that people get it, but they don't, not yet anyway. I mean, how many times do you have to hear a new song before you get the lyrics? It takes a few times.
What was that mechanism for you in that particular group? How did you know that you were heard, that you understood one another?
Well, in the air, you know, we had specific protocols. In fact, as we were flying around doing the show, and I would, they're so close to me that I'm telling them where we are, where we're going, and what's coming up next. And it follows a routine. So it's more about confirming for them that everything is, we're on track with everything, and they are able then to concentrate on staying with me. Because if you look, you know, in the picture behind Roland, that there's no magic computers that are doing this. I mean, it is all eye-hand coordination, steely concentration for 40 minutes at a time. So anytime that I would make a transmission, then the wingman would answer in order, and just by saying their call sign, their nickname. And by saying their nickname, I would know that they heard me and they understood. If I made a transmission and one of them didn't answer, then I would transmit again. And if they didn't answer again, then we would stop and we would move out and we would figure out, okay, what's wrong with your radio or my radio or whatever, because we can't do this unless we can absolutely hear and understand each other.
It's a great leadership practice. Like, you're constantly, what I hear in that is you're just checking back with them all along the way to make sure they're right there with you, versus, you know, it often happens in business or life, you get this accordion effect and all this distance between everybody, and then you've lost touch with the original vision or the mission or whatever it is you had your goal. So that constant check-in process, it probably just became like breathing to you all, like second nature, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, we're not perfect at this. I mean, but even on the ground, we try to check in with people and make sure that you talk to them about a project or what we're doing. And then you ask them, okay, you know, tell me how you're planning to do this. What have you heard? And make sure that they can recite back to you, you know, satisfactorily what you shared, because you'll be surprised how often they heard something different.
Yeah.
George, what was your nickname?
Call sign.
Well, thankfully with the Blue Angels, the tradition is the leader's always referred to as the boss. So for 2 years, at least at work, I was known as the boss. In the fleet, out there in the fleet, my call sign was Elwood, which was a Blues Brothers thing that goes back to a Liberty port that's a little embarrassing, but here we are.
Do you get to choose your own nickname, or is it given to you?
You know, sometimes people get away with picking their own, but generally they don't. Generally, it's awarded to you at some point. And the rule of thumb is don't fight it, because no matter how bad it is, it could be worse and it will change. So take it.
Okay. Well, my code name is Wombat, so I think that would be my Blue Angels code name also.
That's perfect. Two
So,
syllables. Perfect.
Call me Wombat when you call me.
I will.
George, we talked briefly earlier about the Lady Pros community that we have, this movement of women who are in the trades. There are a lot of businesses here that are owned or either co-owned by Lady Pros. So what advice do you have for these Lady Pros in our audience for establishing leadership and trust with an all-male or predominantly male team based off of those 5 C's that you just took us through?
Right. Well, I think these 5 C's are, not gender specific. So they work regardless. The same questions are being asked, regardless. So I think that's a great place to focus. I will share with you an interesting, I was the commanding officer of an F-18 squadron whenever the Navy decided, or the American public decided, that the Navy was going to be a equal opportunity employer, and that women were given the opportunity to serve in combat units. And we had women coming aboard the aircraft carrier. And that was a very interesting experience and a very successful one, I think. But the key to the success, I found out, was that the women had to play to the same, it had to be one standard. You couldn't have two different standards. And I think the women in the audience would definitely agree with this, right? But we had some problems out on the West Coast because they gave, in particular, one woman, they gave her more chance. The intent was so good. We want her to succeed so badly that we gave her extra chances in her training that we wouldn't have given a male student pilot. And unfortunately, the back end of the aircraft carrier doesn't care. And sadly, she was put in a situation that she wasn't prepared for and departed the aircraft and perished. But so on the East Coast, we tried to take the standard that this is one standard, and if you make it, you get to play, and if you don't, and I think, you know, everybody was very comfortable with that, particularly the young people. They had no problems with women teammates or working for women as long as they earned it just like everybody else. And to the men, I would say, if they earn it, give it to them, right? Let's just, you know, let's be gender blind in terms of, if you've got the game, if you can play, then let them play. And and I can quite accurately say that the deployment we went on with women in the air wing and on the carrier, we were every bit, if not more, combat ready than we were in the previous deployment where it was just all men, because we had some really, really talented women. And now that I'm the father of two girls, I'm even more of a raving feminist. So,
rock on, George.
No, I think it's obviously super important in the home services space because, as you can imagine, you know, you get all kinds of different customer types, and no matter what, it's always great to set expectations evenly across the board. But having a blended team, having both co-owners, husband, wife teams, those things is going to end up in much better businesses than just one or the other. So that's really good advice, and having everyone be on that same level. So let me ask you this. We see the economy starting to open up a little bit. We're seeing some more jobs coming through to our pros. It's not V-shaped by any means, but it's starting to come back. So when you're thinking about building great teams and hiring people, these characteristics, these 5 C's, they all relate back to trust. So how do you go about recruiting and figuring out, is someone trustworthy or not to bring back on your team? How do you think about that? How did you do it? And do you have any like stories about that?
Sure. Well, we had a saying that you want to hire slow and fire fast. And we need to take our time whenever we're hiring, because if you make a bad hire, we all know, I mean, it's just extraordinarily painful. So take your time, and you have to be creative in figuring out these different characteristics, you know, and what I found is, particularly doing interviews and so forth, is, you know, the resume's nice, that's interesting, and that maybe gets you in the door. But I want to find out is, tell me a time when you had to sacrifice for your team, or you had to show commitment, even though, you know, things were just really tough and you had adversity, or show me a time where, you know, you sacrificed for a core value that you just wouldn't compromise on, you know,
That's a good
so
question.
forth. And so I think that's what you have to try to get to. And then you have to do your best to try to connect with people who know that person. And one of the, I don't know, one of the, you know, I will literally call the references. Give me a list of references to call, and I will call them, because I need to have more insight. And so when I'm talking to somebody that they've referred me to, I'm not expecting them to make any criticism, or they wouldn't have given me their name. But I will say to them, look, at the end of we'll have a nice chat and have them tell me all about how great the person is. And then at the end, I'll say, ask them 2 questions. I'll say, you know, nobody's perfect, right? So if he or she was working for you now, what would you be coaching them in order to help them raise their game? And that helps me get at what they may see as a gap in their performance and so forth. And then the other thing I ask is, and who else should I be talking to so I can get to know this person better? and they typically give you a couple names that the initial guy didn't give you, and you might, continue to build a full picture before you make that decision. And then the other thing I'll tell you is that you need to, well, I'll tell you how the Blue Angels hire, and people may adapt some of this to your hiring practice. But when the Blue Angels and Top Gun are unique in that they're about the only organizations in the Navy that select their own relief. Normally, there's a group in Washington and in Tennessee that decide where people are going to go. But the Blue Angels and Top Gun get to pick who's going to come in behind them. And at both organizations, it's not the CO who decides. The whole team gets to vote on who it's going to be, right? And for the Blues, it has to be a unanimous vote. So what that means is that all 16 officers, whether we're hiring a pilot or a flight surgeon or a support officer or whatever, maintenance officer, all 16 officers have to agree, this is the person we want on our team. And so effectively, that gives everybody in that room a veto, where you can say, I don't want that person on my team. Now, you have to say why, but you don't have to convince anybody else. That gives a powerful sense of ownership to that group, that this is our team. This isn't the boss's team or the hiring manager's team or whatever. This is my team. And the experience you have when you join is that everybody at some point along the way, this work is really hard. I mean, you have to fly to, and whatever your job is to a level of excellence and precision that you haven't had to do before. And you wonder along the way, I don't know if I can do this. It's really hard. And when you know that everybody there wants you there, voted for you to be there, that helps you dig down a little bit deeper, because that's what you got to do. You got to try harder. You got to get deeper, right? And the other thing it does is, because this person was a unanimous pick, now this is our person, and we need to do everything we can to make sure this person succeeds, because it was our pick. So pretty cool. So
everyone's got skin in the game. Yep,
if you include more people in the hiring process, you'll find, because for me as the leader both years, I thought I knew exactly who we were going to pick, and the people I thought we were going to pick got blown out of the water in the first round, because you can fool the old man, but you can't fool the junior officers. And they knew this isn't the right pick for us. So
George, what do you think your success rate was with that hiring model? I mean, if hiring is a coin flip, then maybe if you get to 60%, that's a huge win. What do you think, given that approach, how exacting it is, what was your success rate?
No system is perfect. And I'll be honest, we've had some teams that gelled better together than others, that had some personalities that were a little disruptive and so forth. But overall, the system has been very good. I mean, if you look at the level of excellence, and the team is now entering its 74th year, performing at an extraordinarily high level of precision. So I think that speaks to it.
Alexa, we get into a bit of Q&A.
So George, I do want to be respectful of your time, because we said we stop at 6, but we do want to get around to a few Q&A questions. You have a few extra minutes?
I'll stay as long as you got questions.
Don't tell that to me. I'll keep you here all night. You can't tell. I ask a lot of questions. I'm a very curious person. Gets me into trouble sometimes, but hopefully not with you. So let's get into it. This one is from Michelle Bonner. So this is a great story. I spent about 100 hours in the, I don't want to say it wrong, rug seat, R-U-G-H-T.
I think she means right seat.
Right, oh, I thought it was a flight term. The right seam of various Cessnas with my then fiance, captain in the Air Force. And the number one thing I learned from that experience was that it's not usually the big thing that takes the plane down. It's a series of smaller mistakes and missed details. I applied this lesson to everything I do. Do you find that life is in the details that way?
Absolutely. And, I'm sure her fiance would agree. In aviation, we talk about any mishap involves we call it the stack of cheese, right? Where the Swiss cheese gets to the point where if you pulled out any one of these, the mishap wouldn't happen. But they all at some point line up, and the holes line up, and you get an accident. And so as we look at, trying to mitigate risk and so forth, we're always trying to evaluate where is the risk and what do we have to do to make sure that the cheese doesn't line up. Yeah, it's a bunch of little things that come together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. This is a good one from an anonymous attendee. What motivational tools are used in the military that could possibly be implemented in our home service businesses?
Well, let's talk about the first one, character, right? Character is all about shared values, core values. And the same is with, like I said, these are all connected. This gets into commitment and mission and purpose. It also gets into connection and people bonding together. One thing the military does very well is we do ceremonies, right? And we do changes of command. We do holiday stuff. We do all kinds of traditional ceremonies. And when I was a young, Lieutenant JG or whatever, just like all the young officers, oh God, we got to dress up and we got to go to this thing, today. But as I matured along the way, I came to appreciate that how valuable those times were for us to stop from the day to day, just working really hard, take a time to stop and reflect on who are we and what are our values and what do we stand for and what are the stories that we tell ourselves, about the company that we are, the squadron that we are, and so forth. And I think that's something that too often companies miss. So I would encourage you to capture your stories, the things when you have people who are living your values, going above and beyond, doing the right thing, capture those stories and advertise them in some form or fashion so that they become part of your culture and it reinforces this upward spiral.
Absolutely. That's something that we encourage our pros to do when it comes to creative marketing techniques too. Like, it's a double whammy. Your employees love that recognition. And we talked about this with Barbara. We talked about this with Krista earlier this week, sharing your employee stories. And when they do achieve that level of greatness that you want them to achieve, share it with the world. There's literally no better feeling for an employee who's invested in a company.
Yep.
And this one, we have a few questions on this topic. So last audience question, they want to hear all about this debrief and what characteristics they can take from it and implement into their businesses.
Okay. So the debrief for Blue Angel flight, and it's typically now, it's the same throughout naval aviation. We're very, very, it's important as part of our routine that when we get done with a flight, even in combat, we come back and we dissect it. What can we learn in order to get better tomorrow? And the Blues over the years have taken it to a bit where every single flight there's a debrief except one. And the only one they don't debrief is the last one of the season because the team's going to change. And so, but every other one, whether it's a practice during the week or on the weekend, after every flight, everything else can wait until we get this debrief done. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of people clamoring for them to do a variety of different things, and everything else has to wait. And then they go into the debrief room, which is typically a conference room, and the only people in the room are the people that were involved in the flight. So it's the pilots, of course, but also each of the support officers has a role on the ground as well during the show. For example, the maintenance officer has a radio at center point, and he's standing there with the FAA, and he's responsible for controlling the airspace during the show. The flight surgeon is grading the air show, and for every maneuver, he's grading or she is grading, and then bringing that back as part of the debrief. So The only people in the room, though, are the team members who were part of that show. No friends, no family. We don't want any distraction. We don't want anybody holding back from being transparent because they don't know who this person is that's sitting over there in the corner. Now, so we sit down and then we follow a very strict routine. And so the leader starts in order to set the example. And when I was on the team, so I would get up and I would say a few words about, generally how I thought it went. And then I would do something that business leaders that I've met and worked with are very hesitant to do. I would confess, if you will, I would list every single significant mistake I know I made during the practice or during the demonstration. And that did a couple things for us. First of all, it helped the rest of the team understand to what degree that I have awareness of my own performance. Because if I'm making a mistake and I don't know it, then we got a problem we have to figure, we have to work on that. If I'm making a mistake and I won't admit it, we got another problem that we need to work on as well. And then it also sets the example that, hey, people are people. Mistakes are going to happen. So as long as you own the mistake and you are committed to not letting it happen again, if at all possible, then people, they're okay with it. And then we go around the room and number 2 pilot does the same thing. And number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 7 is the narrator. Number 8 is the events coordinator, the flight surgeon, the maintenance officer. Everybody gets a chance to speak and share. Here are the big mistakes that I'm aware that I made, and I'm committed to making it better. And then we end our comments all the same way. This has become a Blue Angel tradition. And at first I thought, this is kind of hokey, but I had to play the game. And so I'll do this. But I found it after a while to be really powerful. And we end it by reminding ourselves what a privilege it is to be part of this team. And no matter how bad a day we've had, and believe me, in practices and winter training, you feel pretty bad sometimes because you didn't fly as well as you wanted to. But we all end our comments the same way. We say simply, I'm glad to be here. So, I messed up the diamond roll, or I, didn't turn on my smoke at the right time, or but whatever it may be. And then at the end you say, but I'm glad to be here. And when you hear all your colleagues express that gratitude, it really, it changes the chemistry. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's amazing. The power of gratitude, appreciation is immeasurable. It really is. There's a humility in that too. Yeah. That's a great story. That's a great process. I learned a couple of things that I'd love to go put to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's very similar to, we do retrospectives internally, when we have our iterations. That's what we call them. And we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And everyone puts everything on the board. Nothing's off the table, and it lets everyone air it out. And afterwards, we'd always historically go grab beers together, because it's all coming from a great place, which dives into radical candor.
Yeah, which if you don't mind me sharing 2 other thoughts on that. One is, in that very beginning, the first thing we want to do, though, is if somebody had what we call a significant emotional event, where somewhere in there they had the Jesus scared out of them because something happened and we're flying pretty close together, then we want to get that out on the table now, because learning isn't going to happen if somebody is grinding their teeth about, something or other. And how many times have you been in a meeting where there's an 800-pound gorilla that nobody wants to talk about, but nobody's really getting anything out of the meeting because the tension is so high and so forth. And so we would drop anchor, and it may take a little while, but we needed to clear the air, because otherwise, moving forward, it wasn't gonna do anything productive for us. So,
I love it, George. So one question we love to ask all of the people that we have on the show here with us: knowing what you know now about our pros, about the tips that you shared, who is someone that you could connect us to that you think would be valuable and share some really interesting insights with our pros to help keep them moving along during these times?
Yeah, well, I watched your replay of Jocko Willink the other day.
Aha.
I've got some
They're on to
snowflakes.
you, Roland.
They're on to me. They're on to me.
I could, but you've already gotten that message from Jocko. You know, I may introduce you to Sean Tucker, probably the greatest civilian aerobatic pilot, and he is an amazing human being. And you know, I just can't keep up with him. He's like 70 now, and he's still flying air shows and so forth. And he is one great American, and he is just so enthusiastic and has such a great outlook that I think it would be really cool for your pros to hear from him. If you don't mind hearing another aviator stories.
I think our pros have been highly engaged. You've shared a lot of stuff. That would be an amazing story and an amazing person. I'd love to have him on the show here and ask him a bunch of questions, and might have to have you give us some tip questions too that you think we should ask him.
We'll come to you for reference. That's awesome.
All right,
so as we close this out, Alexa, I'm going to ask the challenger question, which is, George, if you're a pro sitting in their seat, what's the one thing that they should do tomorrow when they get up and go to work? What's the one thing that helps move them towards the fight, move them towards thriving again?
So at the risk of being repetitive, I would just say that tomorrow, think about how you can build trust proactively, because, you know, I believe that it's a huge opportunity for everybody that's listening here, because very, very few people are thinking about building trust proactively. They wait until it's broken or lost, and then they're scrambling to get it back. And frankly, if you look around now, I've never seen in my lifetime such levels of trust across all dimensions of life. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and you don't have to conquer the world the first day, but I would think about tonight, what is one key relationship that I would like to improve on? It doesn't have to be the most important one, but what's one that I would like to get better? And if you think about that relationship and you run it through the 5 C's, I think you're going to find at least one, if not 2 or 3, that you could work on to help, you know, that person. And if you think about it, you know, how can I show her that I walk my talk, that I, you know, live our values? How can I show that I'm fully committed to this, and I'm going to sacrifice and I'm going to make it right? Whatever happens, I am in it. I own it. Or how can I show her that I'm really good and I'm the one that she wants to do this work, and I'm continuing to try to get better? I'm just not good in general. I am the best one for this person and their situation and their problem, right? And then how can I make this person feel like I understand them, that I understand what they're trying to accomplish and what they need and how I can help? And then finally, how can I communicate to them that they will understand me, right? Because if there is miscommunication, whose fault is it? Is it the receiver or is it the transmitter? Well, it may be a little of both, but I submit it's mostly on the transmitter. Has to be able to get it. And I think that in this COVID environment, there are a lot of people that are hurting. And if you are willing to go help them and be there for them, you are going to build such a powerful bond and level of trust that's going to carry you far into after this is all over. And it will be over. It's going to take longer than any of us would imagine or desire now. But someday it's going to be over. And those of us that are still standing are going to be able to move in some pretty cool places because we've made the investments now before then.
Sage advice. I know that having talked with you and been privileged to speak with you twice today, that I am going to start on that anchor point of connection, you know, and not just with my wife, and not just the people that I'm privileged to work with, but there are people in far reaches of my community as well that just a little bit of effort to connect with them can go a long way. George, you have been an amazing guest. Thank you so much for your time throughout the day. So many inspiring messages and really actionable ideas for our pros to take that next mile of that 100-mile race towards thriving again. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, George. That was amazing.
Yeah.
I'm expecting, Roland, you guys are going to do a live event when all this is over, and we can pick this up again, except there'll be beer and wine.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Or your language. I'll see you there. But we want to leave you with one last thing. A really special offer from George. I just put it in the chat, and Roland will put it in the Facebook because I don't have that pulled up. But George, can you tell us what this 90-day challenge is and what they can expect from it?
Yes. So, I would prefer to make a difference rather than just tell some stories and so forth. And so if this resonates in any way with you and you'd like to give it a try, and by me, I don't expect you to take anything I've said today on face value. I'd like you to test drive it and see if it works. And so if you'll text the word high trust, all one word, to the number 22828, I'll connect you with weekly emails for 90 days. It's a 90-day challenge, and you'll receive a weekly email that will go back over these 5 C's of trust with some examples on how you can apply them right away. Because it takes practice, it takes training, it takes over time for this sort of thing to become, part of your habit, part of your DNA. So, and I'm not selling anything. There's nothing on there looking for your address so I can just start marketing you with DVDs and stuff. I just want to help you out a little bit. And so maybe a few of you will take me up on it.
I've taken you up. I just signed up.
Great.
I'll be there. Mark it to me. Thank you so much, George. Really, what an honor for all of us to be able to speak to you, not once, but twice today for the 3 of us. We'll post the link again in the Facebook group to enroll in that 90-day email challenge. So, George, thank you. I'm glad to be here and to have interviewed you tonight. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your service too. Bye, George.
We'll
Take care, pros.
Take care. Have a good night. Good night, everyone.